Hello, everybody. Glad that you're here. This is the weekly 3 Believe Wellness Program, and I'm Jason Whitney. Hope you had a great week. If you've been getting some of the emails, I talked about just boiling down what it needs to happen or what you need to do in order to lose unwanted, unhealthy, undesirable body fat. It's not about a weight loss, because that's really a misdirection. It's not where we really should be focusing. We should be talking about fat loss and fat in a particular type and in a particular area. We're talking about visceral fat, fat around our organs. So we're going to go into that program. Let's go ahead and get started. Over on the right side, if you would be so kind to let me know that you see and hear our message. Just type a little text, and then I'll be able to know that I'm communicating out there in technology land. Doesn't always work for me, but boy, where would we be without it? So let's go ahead and get started. Let me click on the presentation, and we will get started on this week's program. As I mentioned, we're here with the weekly 3 Believe Wellness Program, and what our message is all about, what we're here to do, and to I guess deliver the message of, is what it takes, what we need to do in order to be healthy. And one of those main things, there's so many different degrees of being healthy. There's so many things to being our optimum self that sometimes we get a little lost. We get a little convoluted with the messages that we get in science and what we read on the internet. And even some of the stuff that I've talked about, I imagine that it can be a little challenging to go, well, let's sort it all out. What does it really boil down to? I can't remember everything you've talked about, Jason. I don't want to do everything that you've talked about. I don't have the time. I don't have the energy. I don't have the money. I don't have whatever. Just tell me the absolute bare necessities that we need to do in order for us to be healthy. And that's what this week's program is about. It's just very simple, very boiled down to some very key elements. And so let me tell you a little bit about where I came from and who we are. I'm a food scientist. I started 11 years ago. I specialized in treatment of chronic disease and metabolic syndrome, something that plagues most of our country and unfortunately the rest of the world. A lot of people don't know that as we talk about and as we hear the growth and westernization, the modernization of different parts of the world, like let's say India as an example, they're becoming more affluent, they're becoming wealthier as a nation, as a people, but they're the single fastest population of people in the world for type 2 diabetes. This is not too long ago, they were leading the world in starvation. And now here we have them going from one terrible physiological tragedy into another one. The second fastest growing population for type 2 diabetes is Mexico. It's a very similar situation. So we have to really look at what it means and what it is, and what are those countries doing that, well, America has already done, and what can we do to be able to reverse it? That's why I became a food scientist. I work with doctors and physicians and clinics that want a more holistic approach to treating things like diabetes and obesity, heart disease, high blood pressure, cholesterol, things like that, arthritis. And rather than just giving them medication and send them on their way. And we've been doing that for 11 years. We focus with doctors because sadly the CDC reports that thank you, Robert or Charles, for letting me know the sound and video is there. I know I'm now being heard. And the message that I'm talking about is not in this slide, not a good one. For heaven's sakes, nearly 80% of Americans are overweight. As you just go down through this chart, how many of the people you know, or maybe you, have any of these symptoms? These are not small percentages of our population. This isn't just a group or age of people. This is just taking all Americans and how many have this condition and just a flat percentage. This is including children, for heaven's sakes. So this is not just adults. And if you look around to your family members, your work partners, your neighbors, you'll see that sadly, 8 out of 10 will have at least one of these 4 issues. And it's getting worse and worse. The good news is we can do something about it. We know what causes it. What causes it is an imbalance in our FPC, our consumption of fat, proteins, and carbohydrates. We call it the FPC ratio. Those numbers is what the average American eats. Maybe that's what you used to eat. Hopefully you don't eat that anymore. And it's really not about calories in. The studies are really solid in identifying that it's not about calorie counting or reaching a magical number of 1,500 or 900 or 2,100 calories. It's really where those calories are coming from. And that's what this FPC ratio is all about. All we're asking you is that if you eat the westernized diet that's made popular by the food pyramid and the food plate today, you're going to get these symptoms. It's guaranteed. It's happened for the last 60 years, getting worse and worse. We know hundreds of millions of people that have lived this. It is not a theory. It is an absolute scientific fact. So what I want you to do is think of your food, since we all eat it, since we all have to consume it. Is it achieving your goals, or is it pushing you farther away? Is it killing you, or is it healing you? And the FPC principle that all we're asking is don't go out and start eating weird berries and roots and tree bark. Just simply take the same foods that you're eating and reduce down the ratio of how much the calories you're getting from that food, whether it's 2,000 or whether it's 1,500. You want to reduce the percentage down into a lower percentage. The green balance ratio that I show there. It's more important than exercise, says studies, as important as exercise is, and it's more important than supplements, as important as supplements are. I take them every single day. So the bottom line, if you change your FPC, it'll change the rest of your life health. Guaranteed, absolutely. That's what's happened to me and millions of others. 11 years ago, I was tipping the scales at a not so light 280 pounds. I wrestled 190 pounds in college. And so that was almost 100 pounds above my ideal weight. But after 12 weeks of following the FPC, the things that we're going to talk about today, I got rid of my 10 plus chronic issues, things like high blood pressure and high elevated cholesterol levels. And I look younger now than I did 10 and 12 years ago. So we're going to talk about what are the keys to fat loss. Now, to understand, you have to understand some fundamental laws of body chemistry. Now, don't worry. You don't have to go get your slide ruler and your calculator and your chemistry book. I'm going to keep this really simple. Your body is able to survive because of a complex dance of hundreds of mechanisms working together. But you don't need to know all of them in order to lose unwanted, unhealthy body fat. I think we all understand and accept that we need some amount of body fat, right? If we didn't have any, we would die. If we only had a very small amount, we would be unhealthy. We wouldn't be able to have the function of our body chemistry in our life, basically where we take food in. Our body breaks it down into what's called ATP, which is the body's energy. So it takes all those fats, all those proteins, all those carbohydrates, breaks it down into ATP, spins off some or takes those electrons and breaks them apart, spins off some protons, and that's the magic of our energy that we consume. All right. Now that's as heavy and scientific as we need to get, but having too little body fat is obviously not healthy, And it's also in some of the modeling world, it's not attractive by most people's standards. A study done of thin models found that most men, 86% or yes, 86% of men found these women not to be attractive. They actually like having a considerable amount more fat on them. So ladies, take note that we like a little meat on our women. But if we have too much, like I did at 280 pounds, our activities are diminished and we become unhealthy and we don't like the way we look or feel. I didn't like the way I felt. I didn't like the way I looked. And so it has more than just a physiological impact. It can have an emotional and even a spiritual impact on us. So the question is, how much is the right amount of body fat? Is it different for every single person? And so, though it may look a little different, I'm going to give you some idea of what the right percentages is. So, if you're a high-level mobile athlete that gets around, all you basically want to do is displace the amount of fat that you have with the amount of muscle. Now, you don't see a lot of overweight gymnasts, for example, just because their physiology at those additional weight or with that added weight would just not make it possible to do some of those physical maneuvers, all right? However, sumo wrestlers, for example, one particular sport, they are trying to pack on weight like crazy. If they're a light sumo wrestler, they're going to get pushed around the ring, right? But I'm going to assume that none of you are aspiring to be a sumo wrestler or even a competing gymnast at this point, right? So if your interests don't include being a high-level athlete, but you still want to be active, you won't need as much muscle mass, and you can have a high level of body fat and still be fit and still be healthy. Here's an example of what body fat percentage that to give you a visual idea of what body fat percentages should be and what you may want to have based on which one is healthy. So you'll see it at the very top, you see essential fat. That is the fat percentage that you absolutely must have in order for your body functions to work properly. Say, for example, now look at the difference between men and women, right? Now, women, you got to stop comparing yourself with men. Now, I'm not talking about the Me Too movement, all right? I'm not talking about equality between men and women. I'm not talking about that women are equal to men. I'm talking about just physiology. There's no argument that men and women, well, we're different and we do different things. We're designed. We have a father, in the physiological sense. The father fertilizes with his sperm the egg. The women then take that embryo and house that body, give that baby the nutrients it needs, and gives birth to the baby. That's just the way it is. We can't switch that up. No technology will turn those things around. That's just the raw reality. And women, because of that primary function, absolutely have to have more body fat. So that woman that's at 13% body fat for essential fat, and that man that's at 5%, now these are still extremely low, all right? These are just absolutely bare minimum fat amount that you have to have. Look how much that is. That's almost 3 times more fat for the woman than it is for the man. And she's every bit as healthy as the man is, every bit. He's not healthier because he has less fat in this case, all right? Now, I don't advise you to be down that low because it's extremely hard to be at that weight, and it's not the optimum health. That's just the essential health. You go below that and you can start having some bodily functions that are not going right. Athletes, depending on the sport, will range right around the 15 to 20% for women and 10, 13 for men. Fitness, I mean, you're fit, you're able to get around. Look at where that is for women. It's 24%, men 17. The average American is sitting right around, actually these numbers are a little older. They're sitting actually a little higher than 31%. Men at higher than 24. But to be obese You only have to be 32 for a woman and 25% higher for a man. What that means is that the total body weight that you have, if you're a 200-pound man and you have 50 pounds or more or of that weight, you are obese. Now, another way of putting it, if you have 30 pounds over your ideal weight, you're obese. All right. So there's two different ways to determine how you're obese. One, the percentage of your body fat to how much you weigh, and the number of pounds over your ideal weight. Now, a lot of you don't know what your ideal weight. So in the past, when I've said 30 pounds over your ideal weight, you might be scratching your head going, well, what is my ideal weight? Well, this is perhaps an easier way for you to break that down, because you know what your weight is. You just do a little math and type in that percentage of 32 or 25%. If you're at that or above, I'm sorry to say you're obese. And that's not okay. That's spelling or telling a future that's not going to be awesome for you. Now, I show this picture not as a picture of a goal that I want you to have. Excuse me. This man is recognized as the world's least fat man in the world. His name is Helmut Strobel. He's an Austrian, actually. Kind of interesting that he's from Austria, like Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's really not a bodybuilder. He's just a fitness model and fitness competitor. But this is him right now at 2% body fat. 2%. Heaven's sakes. Now, he's not a teeny guy. He's 6'3". He's 200 pounds. So that means that he has 4 pounds of fat. Now, he's been advised by physicians and doctors, you are not doing yourself any favors. Now, look at his face. Look how gaunt his face is. In other pictures, I've noticed how scraggly his hair is. Now, I'm not making fun of him. I'm just pointing out some physiological realities that he doesn't have all the nutrient that he needs, and his body's not spitting out. Now, you'd look at that, and a lot of people will cringe and go, oh, that's gross. Some other would look at it and go, they have to admire at least the effort that he's put into developing the muscle tone. Not that I would ever want to look like that, but boys and girls, this is too thin. This is not the goal that you should be shooting for. Your body shouldn't have that little of fat. So what is the right amount? So let's just take an example of a bodybuilder doing a competition. A male bodybuilder will get down to about 3 or 4%. Pardon me. Let me get a drink of water here. Because you always don't, I tell you to keep your water close at hand. You can take a drink when you need one, for heaven's sakes. Drink at will, right? So a bodybuilder will, before they compete, they'll get down to 3 or 4%. Now that's still twice as much as Helmut, that picture that I just showed you, to get that, shredded look so they can compete and win the tournament. Now, they can't stay down there. Women will get down to 8 or 9%. For that, that desired competing physique. But they can't stay at that percentage either. They go down for one day and then they go right back up because it's not healthy. It's too little. What will happen is you'll start having things shutting down. You start having, you won't be able to metabolize. Your body is designed to go through 3 basic phases. They'll gain the weight, they'll eat more to reestablish the metabolic energy process. They'll, if they have any fat, which they wouldn't if they just got off competition, it will then release the unused fat, and then phase 3 is revving up your metabolism to use it either for an event that you're going to go into, like getting up and going to the grocery store, or climbing a mountain, or chasing after your kids and they didn't clean their room. Those are the phases that you're designed for. And so we were designed to be able to dip down lower in body fat percentage and then pack it back on again, just as long as we stay within that healthy range. So here is a diagram of what your goal should be, where you want to kind of stay at as far as your ratio. So let's kind of go through this. The top orange is the amount of muscle tissue. So men, 45%, women, 36% of your body weight should be muscle. Essential fat, that's that yellow. We talked about that, 3 and 12% for women. The non-essential fat. Now, fat can be broken into two categories. The essential fat and the storage of fat. The essential, you got to have. The storage of fat is kind of see that like a reserve tank of energy. And it can go up and down depending on your need and depending on your level of fitness. And so you want to have it around 12% for men, let's say 15 to 20% for women. The rest of your body weight is going to be the bones at 15 and 12%, and your organ weight, skin and organs and blood, both at about 25% of your body weight. So that gives you an idea of where your body total weight comes from. And so going back to the essential fat and the storage of fat. Now, just like its name implies, essential fat plays a critical role in your overall health and in your cellular processes. Now, in a report from the Exercise Physiology Department of Nutrition, Energy, and Human Performance, essential fat is described as the fat that's in your heart, that's in your lungs and liver, your spleen and kidneys, your intestines, inside your muscles, and the rich lipid tissues in the central nervous system and inside your bone marrow. That is your essential fat. That's what you've got to have. You don't want to tap into that. As metabolic fuel, essential fat makes sure that you have sufficient energy and reserves, and it helps to conserve your body heat. So if you've ever gone on a very low caloric diet or even on an extended fast, you can see that you start to get cold. So I think I've told you that I've done a lot of research with extended fasts. The longest fast I've done is 23 days. It was a water fast. One thing that I noticed that after about the first 2 weeks, maybe 10 days, I would get cold, right? I was just cold all the time. And that's one of the things that the fat will do for you is it'll conserve your body heat. Now, these essential fats will also protect your organs and joints. It's like packing. When you ship a pack through FedEx, we all been told that they throw those packages around. Sometimes our bodies get thrown around. We need to have ample amount of fat inside to cushion. So for example, our liver, a healthy level of fat in our liver sits at about 5% of its weight. Anything above that, we start having fatty liver disease and problems. And it varies a little bit from organ to organ, but between 5 and 10% of the weight of that organ can consist of fat, and we are in great health. So as chemical messengers, these fats help ensure the body's processes like our metabolism and the growth of our body, in immune functions, making sure that things are going according to plan. So let's go into what it looks like when we have too much fat. So here is a muscle fat analysis. You'll see the weight here. We have a man at the top, a woman at the bottom. Both are just measuring 3 parts of their weight, one being their total body weight, the skeletal muscle mass, other words, kind of like lean muscle mass, and then your body fat. The amount of all of this is in pounds. So let's just take the woman, for example. Someone that's obese, all right? She's weighing 194 pounds, as you can see here, but she's got 66 pounds of fat, and you divide that into her body weight, she's sitting at 34%, okay? And so if you'll notice that as we start to change and become more healthy, in this example, she's at 31%, all right? So she's just above the fitness level. she's at 147 pounds. So she's not a teeny woman, but she's much healthier than now that she's at 46 pounds of body fat. Then as we drop down, so you'll see the figure starts to change. She starts to become more lean. This is the athletic category. She's got 37 pounds of fat, 147 pounds. So I'm going to go back here and look at the other woman. She was 147 pounds at 31%, 46 pounds of fat, about the same weight, 141 pounds, but she has 26%. So it's really not about the weight, people. It's about the amount of fat that you have in a relationship to your hydration and your muscle mass. That's really what determines and it separates this chemical processes that are going on in your body. Here's an example of a very athletic woman. She's 165 pounds, so she's upped her weight, but look at her body fat is 20%. So that's be at the borderline of where I don't want to see women going below that. They're going to start having some issues with menstrual cycles, being cold, not being able to have a good, healthy looking skin, and just being very, very difficult to maintain that body weight for a long period of time. Now, another popular comment or topic that's been going around is the skinny fat category. Now, these are people, sadly, it's becoming more popular than you would think. These are basically people that you visually look at them and they look okay. They don't look like a bodybuilder, but they definitely don't look obese. And you look at them and you think, well, they're not doing too bad. The sad news is that this is growing at an epidemic amount. They have way too little muscle, and they are what is called skinny fat. They visually look skinny, but they actually have high amounts of body fat. This is an example on our scale that we use that actually tells us how much they weigh and how much muscle mass they have segmentally. So on their arms, their legs, their core. I'm going to zoom in on this for a second and show you what I mean. So this is a good example of a person. Now, this person weighed 136 pounds, so not a heavy person, but look at their body fat is at 35%. So they're categorized as obese. You don't normally think as a person that's 135, 36 pounds as being obese. But here's one of the primary reasons. You look at the next, what I have circled there, is that's the amount of muscle that's in their right arm. And then down below is the left arm, their core, their legs. And so the top number is the pounds of muscle that they have in their arm and the percentage in relationship to the rest of the body. So you always want to be at least at 100%. All right, in this example, they're at 88.6. They're way below the amount. They need more muscle in their body, and it's not doing them any favor. So they don't have the muscle tone that they need, and having such a high ratio of fat in their body is really throwing a chemical wrench into their system. And I'll give you some reports a little bit later. So the message I want to really stress here is that weight loss is not the story that I want you to hear. It's not about losing weight. It's about losing fat. And what kind of fat? Visceral fat. I don't care if you have a little bit of fat on your hiney. Doesn't matter if you got a little bit on your thighs, okay? If you have too much fat on your organs, it's literally, no exaggeration, it's a death sentence. It's the stuff in the wrong places. And it's a problem that everybody has to face. In a recent study, they did a study of young people up to the age of 39 that were visually thin. They looked thin. They didn't look skinny, but they looked thin. 32% of those people had visceral fat above the level of healthy. 32%, a third. That's not good. That is amazing finding. So Visceral fat is what I call an equal opportunity kind of killer. It affects both sexes. You don't have to be morbidly obese to carry it or to have it. In fact, research, as I mentioned, is shown to be up to 32% of thin people having visceral fat. Now, these people mistakenly think that they're lean and healthy just because they don't store much subcutaneous fat beneath the skin. Now, subcutaneous fat is that fat that's underneath your skin, right? A chubby arm, or, we sometimes we'll call it cankles, fat around our ankles. You know what? It may not be desirable, but that is far more healthy than it is to have a liver that is fat, because the fat in that area, the visceral fat, actually is considered to be an organ. And I'll talk more about what that means and how that affects us. A common people of skinny fat issue that's hitting the exercise world is runners. This image here is showing that running does not necessarily take care of the visceral fats. They are definitely exercising. You've probably known people that have started to run, and they don't really notice much of a difference. And the reason why that is because of how fat likes to be burned, or how fat likes to metabolize or get burned off. A professor, he's a researcher out of, he's British, but he practiced in Australia, also was at the College of Cardiology in Chicago. He makes the statement that fat is an organ. And Dr. White says that, or I'm sorry, Dr. Bell says that it's a metabolically active. It sends signals and toxic chemicals to the rest of the body that increase the risk of things like diabetes and heart disease. Scientists don't fully understand all the mechanisms that this fat will do, but one thing that we know is that when you accumulate visceral fat, it oozes out these chemicals into some of your internal organs, including the heart. It also goes into your liver, where it's effectively and particularly destructive. It sends inflammatory signals. Those signals can be from insulin, not directly coming from higher carbohydrate meals, right? And that in turn then produces glucose that the body now has to take care of. This is how your risk of type 2 diabetes increases. Now, other signals seem to go to the right to the brain, and that's where some of the issues of Alzheimer's come into play. It makes people more lethargic and less active. They don't feel like they want to exercise. That, of course, then causes even more problems, and it just becomes this vicious cycle. So when we're talking about these issues, I want to focus on that it's metabolically active. Fat cells just don't sit there and do nothing. We kind of think of fat as this lazy person and this lazy cell sitting there not contributing. It does contribute in a negative sense. It's metabolically active. It's sending these chemical signals both to the brain, to the gut, and to the rest of our body. And it is a precursor to heart disease and diabetes, high blood pressure, all the metabolic syndrome and chronic issues, right? So we have to play that into, let me give you an example. One of the organs, the liver. Now, they say through studies, they found that the first step, how you know that you actually have the first step of metabolic syndrome, is by getting too much fat in your liver. Now, years ago, when I would mention the word cirrhosis of the liver, you would say, well, poor fellow, drinking too much, because that was the primary cause of cirrhosis of the liver damage, and then they either died or they'd have to get a transplant, right? Well, about 4 years ago was the first time in the history of mankind that cirrhosis of the liver and fatty liver disease, that second category, the NAFL, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, surpassed those that got fatty liver from alcohol. In other words, more people are now getting cirrhosis of the liver and fatty liver disease from eating the wrong kinds of food than they are getting from drinking alcohol. It's not because alcohol suddenly become a not or unpopular thing. It's the amount of people that are subjecting themselves to these high insulin foods that then make the liver fat, and then you start getting cirrhosis of the liver. This is how big, this is an example of how fat it controls and becomes a metabolic function in your body and how it affects other organs. And it doesn't stop with the liver. It goes on to your heart. It goes on to your kidneys. It goes on to your pancreas. It goes on to your spleen. It goes on. It just keeps going, affecting literally every single organ in your body. So as more and more fat deposits on, say, for example, your walls of your arteries, it forms this hard substance called plaque. And it'll build up in your arteries. That's not handed down from family to family. It's because of what you're eating. It's not because you're eating fat. It's because you're eating too many carbohydrates, and the insulin is causing the plaque to build up on your arteries, which then means because the narrow passage of your arteries are closed off, your heart has to work harder to pump the blood through those ever narrowing corridors, which in turn raises your blood pressure. So in the worst case, it causes blood clots and increases your risk of cardiovascular disease. Why this is important is scientists are clearly identifying that in the evolutionary term, our bodies was not designed for this, meaning the bodies were not designed or created to have an imbalance of macronutrients, calories put in. Dr. Bell says, this PhD of cardiology. Evolution did not predict this. It has no defense for it. It can't do it on its own. So that means that you have to do it. Now, let me kind of repeat what he says there. When he says body's not created to have an imbalance of macronutrients, this is just another way of saying exactly the FPC ratio that I've been talking to you about. Too many of your calories coming from macronutrients. What's the key word for macronutrient? Fat, protein, and carbs. Too much of a macronutrient that produces insulin. If it produces insulin at too high of a rate, you're going to have these metabolic functions that your body cannot fight against. It has no idea how to do it. It's never going to develop it. And we're just going to die sooner, painfully. So that boils down to the fact that you have to do something about this. It's up to you and it's up to me. So what are the solutions? I promised some solutions in the issue. And the first one is your FPC balance. In your diet, just balance out how many of your carbohydrates are coming from, or your calories are coming from carbohydrates, where you want to keep it. You want to keep it below 22%. I like keeping mine right around 15% is where I seem to feel the best. And then I like pushing my fat calories right around the 65 to 80% of my calories coming from fats and the rest coming from proteins, whether it be plant, whether it be animal-based. So the next solution, what are the studies saying? Let's keep this simple. I'm only going to give you 3. Intermittent fasting. You've heard me talk about lots of different steps of intermittent fasting. It's really simple to do. You just don't eat. You drink water. You take your supplements of your electrolytes, right? Your salt, your sodium, your potassium, magnesium, your calcium. You're fine. You're not going to die. I did it for 23 days and survived just fine. But I'll go in a little bit more details of an easier, much easier intermittent fasting. And then the last is exercise, but not just any kind of exercise, HIIT exercise. HIIT stands for high interval intense training. And that has proven to be much more effective than just getting on a treadmill and exercising for hours and hours. All right, so you've heard me talk about some of the benefits. You can do all kinds of HIIT. Let's just go into HIIT. You don't have to go to a gym. You don't have to have equipment. You can do burpees. You can do, in that first diagram, you can just do single leg squats. You can do you can do lunges where you bend down and then you kick your legs out. You can do the ladder there, where you just kneel down in a push-up position and then you pull your knees up to your chest. There are so many different. You can get a ball and throw up against the wall. Just anything to make yourself exerted. If you have knee problems, let's say that you can't get out and you're not really mobile, or you don't know where to start. This little seated bicycle, basically more like a chair, I found $140 on Walmart. Very inexpensive. You crank up the resistance, and the main focus, this is where the magic comes with HIIT. The studies, I've read so many, and they all basically say the same thing. You can take a person, and they've done studies where they took a group of 35 men and women that were already in shape, and one group got on, they were all doing the same type of exercise. So they controlled their exercise, how long they were exercising for, the level of intensity for one group, which is the HIIT group, and then the level intensity for the other group that jogging and stationary bikes. And the non-HIIT group exercised for 45 minutes, and they did it 5 times a week. The HIIT group exercised for 6.5 minutes, and they did that 3 times a week. They found that the HIIT group, much less time, lost more visceral fat around their organs than the long endurance exercise group, and their VO2 was better. Now, VO2 is a measurement of how much oxygen your body, your muscles can take in, that their capacity to absorb oxygen when you're breathing. You know, when you're breathing hard, when you're really exercising, you can only breathe in so much air, one, because of your lung capacity, but also your muscles can only absorb so much of that oxygen because of its ability, its practice that it's had, and some other mechanisms that are in place, how much muscle fiber you have, how much fat you have. But your VO2 increased greater in those that worked out shorter. They only worked out 6.5 minutes 3 times a week, and that was a little bit better, not a lot, but it was a little bit better than the group that worked out for 45 minutes 5 times a week. The secret to HIIT exercising is you have to push it to your max, but only for 30 seconds. So start out, get one of these. If you have some mobility issues, just sit down, get on a treadmill, on a bicycle, so you don't fall down and hurt yourself, and you push as hard as you can. Now, guys, girls, really hard as you can for 30 seconds. Then rest for 2 minutes. Then hit it again for 30 seconds. Do that 4 or 5 times, and start out with just doing it even twice a week. Just starting out twice a week, you will start to effectively change the metabolic impact of that fat around your organs, meaning you'll start to burn visceral fat faster than if you started walking around your block. Now, if you want to walk around your block, go ahead and do that because you need to say hi to your neighbors. Getting mobility, that's great for your lymphatic system. It's great. But if we're talking about the fastest, most effective way to burn off visceral fat, then this is the way to do it, is through HIIT. Add a little fasting to that, meaning all you have to do is stop eating at 8 o'clock at night, drink your water, don't eat till noon the next day. Drink your water, and then have your normal 4 meals. If you're on phase 1 of our program, then go ahead and have your 4 meals, but you have them every 2.5 hours instead of every 4.5 hours. You eat the same amount of food, but that extended fast actually will accelerate your visceral fat loss. Visceral fat was was reduced by a greater margin through intermittent fasting than it was through strenuous exercise or through reduction of calories. So they had a group of people that just reduced the amount of calories down to 500 calories. No, I'm sorry, 650 calories. And then they fasted for 6 weeks. And then they had a group that did just exactly what I said. It's called the 16-8 fasting model, where and it doesn't matter where you can do it. You can do it in this clock. It showed it from 4 to 8. You can do it any time frame. Just make sure it's 16-8, 16 hours of fasting, 8 hours of eating, and keep your carbs down lower, keep your fats up higher. And the second group of fasting lost almost twice as much fat. They ate the same amount of calories. They just ate them at different times. Okay, this is key. So throw intermittent fasting in the mix. And then the last is your FPC. So the 3 secrets is get your FPC balance in. Follow this chart here. 53 to 75% of your calories coming from healthy fats. Make sure that your omega-3s are higher than your omega-6s. And your proteins, 19 to 27%. And then your carbs, 12 to 22. I don't care where the foods are coming from, except for the category of carbohydrates. Let's not make the 22% of your calories in your day all coming from fruit, for example, because that's just Mother Nature's candy. Sure, it tastes good. Yes, it's better than a candy bar, but it's still a refined glucose molecule, and it's going to get your insulin spike higher. Throw in some complex carbs in there. Throw in some fibers in there to be able to throw up the mix. So the rest of it, get your fats from any place you want. Get your protein from any place you want. I want the fats, of course, to be more omega-3s, because that's what the study says better. But if you want your proteins to come from plant, if you want them to come from animal, it doesn't really matter based on the study. So those are the 3 secrets. That's how we overcome these issues of the fastest fat loss, the type of fat loss which is around our organs. Those 3 things, try them out. They're very simple. They're easy for all of us to do, and you will see a reduction in your visceral fat. You'll have a longer life, better life, and, well, you'll be happy for it. Thank you for your time. Appreciate, hopefully you got some good information out of today's little exercise, and I'll see you next week.